Cambell. Hello, darling.
Hello, Kelly. How are you today?
Good. So Cambell and I are going to try something wild here. I'm about to get my phone and put a 30-minute timer on us, and we are attempting to launch basically a little side hustle from our podcast, which is basically going to be a weekly update of our theories so far. Because as you guys know, our whole work here with our show is not to lay down facts and make massive truth claims, but in fact to enjoy the questioning and the quest and the theorizing and the letting our imaginations run wild, where we both really believe that that's where our intuition is the strongest and where we can actually get closest to the truth. So our whole purpose together is to enjoy making these theories, and we're going to attempt to summarize it in 30 minutes. Can we do it, Cambell?
Yes. Can we do it? Yeah. And that's the thing. This is all about, we're the creators, guys. So that's what this is all about, right? Let's create what we want. It's not so much about what was. It's about what could be. So we obviously started off with what was. That's what opened up this whole genie's bottle. So we started off with Tartaria myself back in the day. Learning about this country, this empire called Tartaria. And as we looked into it, it got bigger and bigger, and we found more and more information. And that led us on to looking at the mud floods, these flooded buildings.
Yeah.
And of course, the next thing after that was the star forts.
Yeah.
And that, those three together really just is what blew my mind. And then of course, with the mud flood, we started noticing the architecture, then the size of the buildings, and then everything was the same. And then so we got this theory, or this this knowledge that what we've been told is not true. History is just his story. So we started digging.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing we came upon, obviously the antiquitech, the energy, the free energy, all these different components, and just that sort of view of a different kind of society that functioned differently to what we're doing, and that as far as we can tell, worked a lot better, right?
Yeah.
And that's obviously where we're trying to get back to, or a better version of that. So we got all that, and then we got onto, there's water everywhere, right? There's man-made canals, there's star forts with all these moats around them, there's all this water everywhere, water wheels, and the whole steampunk thing is all steam, right? Which is water, and the trains and this water. So water seems to be a very, very big part of the old world. And then we learned about cymatics and the frequencies of water, and tied it to the cathedrals and to all these things. And so yeah, after that, we sort of came up with the theory that we know, right? Water holds memory.
Yeah.
And so what else holds memory, and what else is everywhere? Because we've also come to realize that this, what we call air, is actually just a thinner or lighter version of water.
Yeah.
So water is everywhere, right? It's omnipresent in our realm, just like grand organized design, right?
Yeah.
So this is the thing. They were all based on water, and the Vedic people and in India, they still do it. They worship water before they drink it, and that's obviously putting intention in the whole Dr. Emoto stuff. So yes, so we started at water. We've sort of most people know that the main story of Tartaria and everything. If you don't, check out my channel. But yeah, we sort of looked at water. So what are your thoughts on that, Kelly?
Yeah. So if we were to discuss his theory so far of everything we've come to, yes, we started with Tartaria. We started with these amazing, I personally started with the buildings. That's where I kind of landed in on this, and how extraordinary they are, and how much information is available to us once we start looking at these buildings, through the eyes of they potentially were not built by us. And this civilization has made up basically all of the foundations of our concept of what our worldwide cities are. And then looking at them from the perspective that this civilization basically was so close to us in the timeline that we still integrate into all of these beautiful feats of engineering and architecture as if we did them ourselves. So for me, it was like bringing that timeline right back to back. So getting rid of this sort of perception that these were you know, that we have been taught that we go back in time, people get less and less and less developed, less and less and less advanced, and that we hold the top of the pyramid, I guess, with our advancements. So for me, once we started to looking at the buildings, we really understood that actually the civilization that just came just before us, like literally a few hundred years ago, actually were far more advanced than we are today. And thus that started my understanding about history and, you know, what in history is actually real. And once you start looking at that, you can basically throw out every textbook you've ever read, every course you've ever studied, every class you've ever been to, because we start to understand that actually the majority of what we've been told about history is a fabrication, a non-truth, that the people who have been credited for the architecture of these buildings have been fabricated, that there is actually no basis or grounding for these, you know, these names to be appearing and taking, you know, what's the word? They're taking acknowledgement for these beautiful creations, credit, that's it, which is just basically not the case. So we're looking, that's where I came in with the theory of Tartaria. And then we started to embellish that and look at what these buildings meant and how they, you know, what was repeated in these buildings. And we understood that they were basically a living technology, because then we started to look at all the use of electricity and how these buildings, and then we coupled that with the World Trade Fairs in this timeline, and those beautiful, extraordinary World Trade Fairs that really did. The first thing you notice is not only are they beautiful and stunning to look at and very far past our concept of what the earth has ever looked like extraordinary in our wildest imaginations. And then we've got to look at the fact they're always lit up, they're totally powered. Before, in most parts, we even had the notion of light bulbs and electricity. So there's a real clash between our what we've been told about the history of our inventions of things like light bulbs and power tools and tram lines and trains and automobiles, all those things really clash once we start to understand that we, the timeline with the architecture of our cities and buildings also have been completely fabricated. So that's where I started with Tartaria. So if you take all of that and then lead us to what these buildings actually, you know, what was so obvious to us about them. And yeah, one of them was definitely water. They all seem to be designed for water and around water and embellishing the use of water. And water was fundamentally a big part of the architectural style of these structures. And then, of course, you link that with the star forts and their, you know, association with how they're placed with and around water. And we start to really go into the idea of water. And then also to mention, Campbell, 2 years for most of us going through the disclosure movement, and all we heard for 2 years was watch the water, watch the water, watch the water, watch the water. So that was another factor to all of this for me. So yeah, water is a great place to start if we're to talk about our theory of everything so far. So where did we get to with our theory of water, Campbell?
Of water, yes. Well, just quickly, well, actually we can touch that later, but another thing on that we learned and that they used to affect the waters is, you know, we suddenly understood that there was a reset, right?
Yeah.
We've got this notion of resets, and like Kelly said, as the further we looked into it, the closer these resets got, and we realized, hang on, the world was different not that long ago. You know, we're talking 100 years, maybe 200.
And not to interrupt
then,
you,
of course,
Campbell,
what have they done since this last reset?
I just about to say, I'm just footnoting in there that not only is the reset so back to us, maybe 100 years, 200 years ago, we are still today integrating with the deconstruction of this technology. That's how close it is. Those deconstructions are still happening today in 2022. Sorry, continue.
Exactly. And one of the major things that they attacked, the first things, was the water.
Yeah.
Right. We see it everywhere. All these canals that have been cut off so that they don't flow anymore. They've been emptied. Of course, water pollution. I mean, it's a term, right? And then we know about, you know, what's going into the drinking water and all this kind of stuff. And of course, if water, well, we know water holds memory, and if that's what they were using to, you know, embellish their lives and their experiences, and of course that's what would be attacked first.
Yeah.
Right. Cut it at the source, right? Not these other words, source, right? Water source.
Yes.
Right. It's a term, water source.
Yes.
Where's the water source?
Yeah.
Right?
exactly. What do we call God so often when we talk to the universe? Source, 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 source. And not to mention also that we also realized that once we looked at these timelines, you know, we've got these extraordinary feats of engineering and architecture, and yet none of these engineers or architects actually integrated plumbing or sewage into the design of these buildings, so that the sewage ended up being tunneled and funneled directly into the clean water sources. So we started seeing the 1900s, when we've got images of these extraordinary built-up cities, London, New York, everywhere across America, here in Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, and you've got and Brisbane, and you've got this literal overflow of fucking shit happening everywhere, which makes no sense to the skill and cognitive abilities of our engineers if we were to say we built these cities. So then where does that sewage go? And I would say deliberately it funneled into the streets and then into the water sources and then polluted all of the major beautiful clean bodies of water, and that pollution then brought about sicknesses, poverty, plagues, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, there seems to be from the 1900s onward a very deliberate attempt to poison and pollute the water source, and they've carried that on with the oil spills and all the shit going to the water and the chemicals that they've done systematically ever since. Like, there's been absolutely a massive agenda to corrupt our water.
Definitely. Every major city's had a time called the Big Stink, literally all pretty much from the 1850s to the 1900s. And that's because they all started pumping sewage into these tunnels, went straight out into the canals. And and then they have all this airborne disease and stuff happening. And this is the thing, when you look at it, it only happened, you know, I mean, then you can go back into the 1600s and that, and they say there was other stuff, but there's, you know, nothing. And then there's this sort of 50-year period, and it happens everywhere. Right. So clearly something's going on here, you know. It's interesting. It's also at the sort of the same period as all these world's fairs, you know. So there's this disjunct, right, of why would they be building cities that they live in and just pumping all the sewage into the canals, but they can build these amazing cities that they're going to just tear down, right? Just temporary, but they work perfectly, right? Because there's no stories anywhere of big stinks in world's fairs or anything to do with, you know, bad plumbing or sewage, or, I mean, there's no stories of anything going wrong, you know, apart from that one, there was a, you know, murderer running around apparently, but as far as the construction and everything, they all worked perfectly. And of course the fountains, which is the thing, you know, they were building these plumbing systems for fountains. They were pressurizing them, sending the water 20, 30, 50 feet in the air, but they couldn't build a toilet. I mean,
it makes no sense. So, I mean, I think fundamentally the focus in on the sewage and the shit situation is actually one of our biggest clues that our cities were not constructed by us in the chronological order that we are taught at school. Like, that is basically a massive fabrication. And, you know, when you look at, like, if you are a builder, if you're built your own home or anything like that, you know how basic it is to build a toilet. Like, it's basic. It's basic. It's not hard to figure out. And if they're actually creating these amazing, and you guys can see with your own eyes, the amount of amazing fountains that exist in our beautiful cities that have been told to us were there from the 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, to get water running to those fountains and then to actually have any pressure on them means that they've worked out the plumbing and how water flows. So to do all of that and then not deal with the innovation of the toilet is fundamentally ridiculous. Like, so that's like, to us, that was the first major significant clue that what we're talking about with this civilization is, you know, we did not create these cities, no way.
And and that's the fountains were everywhere in every city, and they took them out, right? And they replaced them with, you know, bubblers and things, you know, these little other water fountains. So that they were running through God knows what kind of pipes. So they didn't want us drinking that water. Right? They literally, like Kelly said, they were all functioning. They were all fine. They all worked perfectly. But they ripped them all out.
So we know, Campbell, there's something very powerful about,
you know, it's probably the way they were built. You were getting good water. Sorry.
No, that's our 5-second delay, everyone. One day we will sort it out. But we know that when you go and you find a living water source today, when you go up into a mountain, and or somewhere beautiful and pristine, and you find living water, you can tell there's a frequency that comes off it. There's a vibration that comes off it. There is life that comes off it, and it's rare. We have to fight so very, very hard today to find a good source of water. You can't do it by turning on the tap. That's been deliberately poisoned. They've put fluoride in the water deliberately. You can't do it by like drinking anything, even bottled water is not reliable at all. They've done so many tests, and the black shit that ends up coming out of it is disgusting. And they've gone into, we all know they've deliberately gone into other nations and corrupted the water source under the guise of production and manufacturing. Like, it's all been a very deliberate push on the water. And so you look at when you drink living waters, it's like your body just takes in this gorgeous life-giving frequency. So we have come to think that the Tartarian culture, they may or may not have been a society that, because most of us have theorized that, well, if there wasn't toilets already sorted in these buildings, that they didn't need them, and therefore they weren't ones that used or required toilets. So potentially they're breatharians, they weren't reliant on food as we know it. That food eating has been a deliberate tool to lower our density, especially the type of food that they've given us. And then, of course, we've got the great debate between like the frequency of eating meat or not. And all of those things are something that you could go off on many rabbit holes on. And at the end of the day, I don't think at this point, any decision you make around diet and food is ultimately going to, corrupt your ability to understand this knowledge and ascend through it. I think it definitely slows down your physical being's potential of thriving. But I certainly don't think it's the be all and end all. And if you're a meat eater or a vegan, it doesn't really like shift your ability to cognitively understand and move through this powerfully into your sovereignty. But
and we're not saying eat Maccas.
Yeah, I mean, we know that our food's been corrupted in every single way. But, the corruption of our food and the corruption of our water has been very deliberate. And we can all take, work really hard to counteract that with, our own sovereignty. But like at the end of the day, that still does not corrupt your consciousness. If you're going to choose to understand and try to ask the bigger questions and get the bigger answers, then there's no stopping you. Whatever they look at us, we are a living testimony to the fact that human beings are so resilient. We're extraordinary in all the poison and shit they throw at us, and here we are still managing to get to this point of understanding. So all that aside, so we get to water. So I'm just going to also add, we also are going to acknowledge that from the theory of everything so far, the earth is flat. At least that's the easy way of putting it. It may be a very expanded version of a flat realm. It may not be flat as we mean flat, but it certainly isn't the flying ball through space that we have been taught. We also acknowledge that most of our land masses have come as a result of either cut down giant trees, making up our plateaus of mountains, also the potential of fallen titans and giants, because part of the theory of everything so far is that the civilization before us, before them, were actually larger and larger and larger and larger. And we have inherited a chronological timeline from giants that, and they were extensively big and make themselves known in all of our myths and fairy tales. But some beautiful video footage coming out now, really clearly showing the potential of a lot of our mountain ranges and land masses were actually the remains of our fallen ancestors, gigantic ancestors, which brings us back to Tartaria and the buildings, because obviously another big clue is that they're all fucking gigantic. Like all the doors, all the windows, all the columns are all fucking gigantic and make no sense to the size of us compared to, when you have a door that size and a human this size, 0 sense. There's no way of rationalizing or justifying that decision.
No. The ones with the knockers or the handles where you can't even reach them, they're the best ones.
What's the point?
Can't even reach the handle to get in.
I know.
Like, what the hell?
I know.
This is the thing. And just one more point on water. It's the Trinity, right? It's the only element we have that exists in 3 forms, 3 states. So same as the Trinity. So in this 3D, is the thing.
And we are in 3D
they've
here.
definitely attacked, Yeah, and yeah, that's what I was going to say. What you were talking about, with food is that proves that we're not what they tell us. That proves that we're more, that we're energy. If we can, put up with all this crap, and some people can get affected by it, and some people can't, and it's all to do with how you think. I mean, that's really, a good point to make. Of that's where we're coming from.
Yeah.
We're trying to say we create this. It's how we see the world that gives us our experience. We can change it. We can take information in and we can change it and put something better out. That's kind of what this is all about.
Yes, Campbell, it is the power of our consciousness.
Water.
The power of our consciousness. And on that topic,
the nation,
sorry, go on. We do pretty well, everyone, like with this lag. I was going to say, if the point of all this is our consciousness, and no matter what shit they throw at us, our consciousness is stronger. And what medium on this realm holds consciousness greater than any other medium? And it's definitely water. And we all know that from the work of that beautiful Japanese scientist that came out a couple of decades ago, and where he did the tests on water and the power of intention and words on water. So if we're operating the 3D realm, polarized 3D realm, then potentially, Campbell, as we move up in the dimensions or up in the frequency band, then water becomes more expansive as well. So when we're looking at, say, leaving the firmament, which is what will lead us onto our next theory, potentially we're looking at 4 versions of water, to 5 versions of water, to 6 versions of water. And each time that potential of water changes and provides infinite potentials and possibilities.
And we hear so much about these different levels, these different worlds, the seven heavens, all this kind of stuff. It's all this different, and they, this whole sort of 5D, it's all about density, right? It's all about different densities. Oh my gosh, am I coming to? And
9 minutes, go. All right.
We've got 9 minutes left.
So,
all right.
Water, Campbell. Water above us, water below us.
The water. So the trees, yes, and the trees were there dragging it up from below and putting it into the atmosphere. So back then there would have been a lot more information around us, if that's how we're looking at water.
Oh, I'd never thought of that.
Course, yes.
The water from the trees would have created water.
And you feel...
Yes, fantastic. Right? So when they cut the trees down, we really lost a big influx of information. Makes sense.
They cut that as well. Exactly. And when we do get toxified by what's going in our body, what's the only way, pretty much, to get rid of it? Water.
Water fasting.
Flush yourself out with water.
Yes.
Right? Water fasting. That's exactly right. How to reset your system. Just water fast. So water. And then, of course, and it's a running theory, many people, think that it's water above us.
Yes.
Obviously you can't have a pressurized system next to a vacuum. So there's definitely got to be a barrier up there. So what's on top of that barrier? Is that just a thicker density of water?
Or
and
when
we say
density.
Water, we're not necessarily saying like the ocean's up there. Yeah, a different density of because air, like we mentioned before, is a density of water.
Yeah.
So it's the same structure that the Grand Order's designed, the what's the word?
Grand organized design.
That carries the information up and down.
Yeah.
Grand organized design. Yeah.
Excellent.
And then water's beneath, and we even showed that video of the guy trying to get through a lake underwater, showing that there's a different density, right, of water down there. And then, of course, we looked at there's actually a term, what are they called? SFOs, submerged flying vehicles, or something. USOs, underwater, unidentified submerged, or something. Anyway, UFOs underwater. It's a thing. Right, there's heaps of videos of them coming out of the water, going underwater. There's all this stuff under the water that we can see on Google. Can't verify that obviously, but there's a lot of stuff under the water. All the old maps show all these, sea creatures and sea monsters and all this stuff.
Aliens.
And of course, what are we surrounded by? Aliens. But
underwater creatures.
What's on the inside of the aliens is frozen water.
Yeah.
And Antarctica's frozen. So that's like an information bank, right?
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. So then we've got the frozen
is
Arctic
that
wall
something as well. That when that froze, it sucked in a lot of the info, and is it going to melt or something, and that comes back? We don't know.
Yep.
And then,
Fantastic.
what's outside that? Well, exactly right. Extra territory, extraterrestrials, aliens. They're just people that aren't from your land. So we have all the terms. I don't mean anything to do with spaceman at
Yeah.
all. And of
I mean,
course,
fantastic. Yeah.
space suits,
Yes. Look very much like
NASA,
diving
training in the
suits.
pool, bubbles,
Yes.
diving suits.
Yes, diving
Exactly.
suits. Yep. So all those ancient scribbles, ancient question mark, whatever ancient means, because essentially we know our timeline is completely fabricated, and we also know that time doesn't actually exist. So we know that time has been a false loop that we've been presented with, this space-time loop that we're in. But time doesn't exist, and therefore this chronological order backwards is also really fucked up. So basically, you see all those etchings of aliens etched into these sort of like past hieroglyphics or whatever. They look so much more like diving suits. We've seen the rockets, they go up to really come down, and they skim the firmament like a surfer, and then they get the momentum go down. We know that the oceans are off limits. We know that all of our focus has been put on up there on space instead of down there. We have no access to down there. It's the most underexplored from our perceptions part of the world. It's the biggest part of the realm, and it's most underexplored. Once Jacques Cruchot sort of like passed, like there's never been any focus in on the water. And of course they invented the big Jaws story, so everyone was terrified of the water. Amazing Hollywood feat there. Just as scary as the idea of a vacuum of space. Like they've basically made, Hollywood has set up this concept of above us and below us as being terrifying, and just stay grounded, human beings, like just stay here and don't look up and don't look down. Now, interesting, in the fountains, so many of these statues from the Tartarian realm are all pointing upwards. They're all pointing upwards as if there's something up there that they need to be aware of. We need to be aware of something they revered. So coming in from the water idea that potentially the firmament is water above us, water below, and that to access through above past our firmament, which appears to we're in some form of quarantine, one would go down through the ocean and out around and out to the other side, past our firmament realm. Potentially our notion of shooting stars is actually vehicles potentially traveling through realms. But that then leads us in the next 4 minutes, Campbell, into our most current theory, because also within that we play with the idea of there being a missing sun. And that missing sun, potentially, when you want to take down a civilization of the light, and here we are calling ourselves light workers, the ancestors of this culture waking up, and you want to take them down, like you could remove a light source and introduce a darkness. That would be a very terrifying, petrifying weapon. And in doing that, it would essentially shrink all life form. When you put a plant in the darkness and the shades, it stunts its growth. When it's in full sun, it grows really big. And we know that we come from a timeline where everything was really fucking big. So if you take that idea and lead us to the very last place that we've ended up here, we've done well, Campbell, 30 minutes. The very last place you end up here is the idea that potentially the Tartarian civilization was a civilization of the air. And air, in fact, as you point out lastly, is in the name Tartaria.
Yes. And then, back to the trees, if there was more trees around, what kind of clouds would we have? Because everything, it's all cities on clouds, right? Heaven's, in the cloud, God's on a cloud, all these, ideas of, people driving around on clouds. So, excuse me, we know there was a vapor canopy.
Yep.
So would that have made it more possible to do these things? Would that have changed the electromagnetic fields? Because there's, a lot of these old stories say that they were magnetically levitated.
Yes.
And these are stories back from like the late 1800s and stuff. They're talking about levitating cities, and they don't give the full scientific explanation, but they've got this idea, and you've got to wonder where that comes from. And just this idea, in general, where does it come from? This flying, which we went through. All kids, dream of flying. Well, what's that? Angels have wings. There's all these flying things. Everything's in the sky.
Yep.
And of course, the fallen angels or whatever they were, and even UFO, they all come down from the sky apparently.
Yeah. And then all the Viking mythology, all of the Odins, all of the Zeuses, all of that Asgard, all of that theology that's come in through a lot through the movies with Marvel and things, but like most people are aware that there was like any notion of gods above us or gods more advanced than us come from the sky. So like it's a really interesting theory, but then bring it back to the buildings, Cambell, and we can actually see in the buildings there are like everywhere you go in these Tartarian structures are these towers that look like fucking lighthouses with beautiful balconies and landings and doorways and windows so far up in the air that make no sense to a civilization that are building for those on the ground. And then you look at the whole steampunk movement and this gorgeous, exciting imagination, this consciousness that's come through out of nowhere. Like steampunk has come out of nowhere, and it's just like full of these beautiful flying machines and Airbuses and flying machines coming into our cities and docking on these towers. And when you look at those, Cambell, you feel a sense of like, like it feels so good and exciting. Like there's a conscious heart connection to those images. But when you look at, say, a UFO or a spaceship, we get that sort of like cold, detached, freaky, like no heart relationship to it. It's really interesting the different consciousness we have on those two images, a UFO and a flying pirate ship.
It's true. And the towers was, we were wondering what are all these towers everywhere? What are they doing? Why are they everywhere? Yeah. Lighthouses, just these random, there's towers, just random towers everywhere. So yeah, and then we found the pictures of them docking on this Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building in these kind of gothic-y looking cities, the sort of Batman kind of looking, what do they call it, Art Deco kind of buildings. So there's got to be a use, because when we were in Melbourne, we were looking up at them all the windows are blocked in, all the doorways are blocked off, so no one is using these. So if they're that high, why would they have needed them 100 years ago and not need them now?
Absolutely.
What's the deal there? So
absolutely. And like we got 1 minute to summarize. And in summary, what I find really fascinating about it is that they've actually, like, if we look at what could have brought this civilization down, literally down from the skies, descending down to the lower frequency band, being imprisoned and enslaved on land and being caught on land. And when we look at the people of the land, the original law givers, the sovereign beings, our elders, those who own the law of the land, they are our indigenous tribal members, and they look very different from us. There's a distinction there. And then these beings of the sea, of the water, came in and hijacked, and now we run off maritime law. So we've got the culture of the land, the civilization of the land. We've got those that hijacked us from the waters, and then we've got the civilization of the air. So we're looking at, like, so far, air, land, air, earth, and water. So what we haven't attested to is fire, and potentially that's where the sun comes in, and the pyramids. So,
empire. Right,
empire. Yes. All right. I think that's
pyramid pie within. Yes. Okay.
All right.
That's it. We'll stop talking.
Okay, that is today's episode. We did it. This is our first experience of our side hustle podcast here of our theory of everything so far to do with Tartaria and the realm and our theories and exploring everything. So I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be back with next week with this again. So far.
Thanks for watching. Stay awesome.